The first case is about obsessive thinking disorder that I had. It was about my eyes getting a paper cut. Fortunately, it wasn't an obsession serious enough to make my life difficult. It manifested infrequently. I thought that I would be able to live with it because I could put up with it most of the time. Also, it went away after a while. I think I developed it when I was in high school, studying for exams. However, it grew worse after I came of age. I didn't know why. I began to feel more and more afraid. My anxiety grew as I started to believe that my life was going to be ruined if I couldn't fix it. I was afraid of getting caught in a vicious circle. So, at the beginning, I tried to resist. I decided to imagine a shield when my obsession on getting a paper cut on my eyes manifested. The idea was to create a counter-reaction, by making my imaginary shield clash with the spear, my fear of getting a paper cut. As a result, both of them were to go away. It seemed to work to an extent. Whenever I started to have obsessive thoughts, I imagined a shield protecting my eyes. This tactic did protect me for a while. I thought that I came up with a great idea. But then, I started to question, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? I assumed that my OCD would go away if I protected myself from the obsessive thoughts with the imaginary shield. However, my symptoms became worse. Now when I think about it, if I kept on doing so, I might have ended up accepting and aggravating my OCD. I was in a situation where I was bound to create increasingly stronger counter-reactions. At that time, I didn't know that I was in the slow process of developing obsessive behaviors. It was the same as repeating obsessive behaviors to cancel obsessive thoughts. I didn't know that by imagining a shield, I was accepting my OCD as a real thing. Only because I believed in the existence of the spear, I needed a shield. What I had to do on the contrary was to cut the power source of my obsession. It is the same as unplugging appliances. I didn't have to pay attention to unnecessary things. That was how normal people reacted. After realizing that I won't be able to go on as I used to, I decided to deal with the root causes of my OCD. I analyzed myself using psychological narrative analysis tactics. I went into a trance, a highly immersed state of mind, and recalled the moment I developed OCD. It was when I was studying for the university entrance exam for the second time because I failed the first one. I could recollect the times I suffered from obsessive thoughts in the reading room. After doing that, I asked myself a question. Why am I hurting myself? Why do I have to suffer? To answer that question, I moved on to the next scene from my past. I was bleeding from a gash on my head and my sister didn't know what to do. It happened long ago, I think I was about 5 years old. I hurt my head jumping down from a truck. My sister washed my head at the nearby tap but I kept on bleeding. We should have asked for help, but we were afraid of getting scolded by our parents. We tried to hide the situation. Why am I trying to hide the situation from my parents? My dad got really angry at me after taking a look at my injury, because he was worried sick. I was afraid of my mother and sister being reprimanded on my account. I understand the scene I remember might be different from what really happened. It was an event from distant past. In fact, my father was a person who never directly expressed his anger. He was honest and sincere. The image of him being mad at me is likely to be the product of my fear and anxiety. This was because of my weak spot. I cannot stand conflicts happening because of me. The symbols inside my mind as the things that are important. This also reveals my desire to be a savior of my mother. This is related to a psychological developmental stage related to the Oedipus complex. Sigmund Freud used this term to describe a child's desire for his or her opposite-sex parent, jealousy and anger toward his or her same-sex parent. Even though I was in this stage, one couldn't be hostile to my father because he was very nice to me. He had many expectations on me as his oldest son. I had to accept his expectations. I couldn't hold animosity towards him even though I felt it inside my mind. I was caught in conflicting emotions. I chose to endure silently without expressing anger. This is the reason why I had to hide my emotions. As such, I was able to think of the few key scenes in a very short while. By examining such scenes, I gained an emotional insight. With the supervision of Mr. Jiwon Yoon, I could give shape to this insight. The psychological narrative that caused my OCD I found with his help is as follows. Firstly, I found out that my symptoms surfaced when I was working on my own to achieve something. Such activities included studying or reading alone. These activities provided symbolic stimuli that were connected with the time I studied for the university entrance exam for the second time. My OCD subsided when I got employed but came back after I started a life as a counselor. It was because I began to read and study alone more often. The only strategy I could take when I was young to realize my desire to be a savior of my mother was to study hard and to get admission to prestigious universities. I found out that the act of reading books was related to the symbols of studying inside my mind. The fact that I couldn't tell my parents that my head was bleeding even though concealing it may affect my survival implied that there was much more important and intense psychological narrative hidden inside my mind. This also meant that there were more symbolic incidents that overlap with this scene. These incidents imprinted on my subconsciousness were related to the social fears I had, such as hurting someone's feeling or my parents not allowing me to play with my sisters. When I was young, I must have thought that such incidents will take me away from the people I love, create conflict and disturb the happiness of my family. I must have been extremely worried and scared about them happening. I think I felt that I should never be the cause of such incidents. They were the things that should never happen. When we are young, our parents can affect our survival greatly. This must be the reason why I was so afraid of having conflicts with my parents and tried my best to hide what I was feeling and thinking. Due to this fear, I was unable to cry or be angry even if I was bleeding from my head. This was because I had a faith that worse things will happen if I showed my emotions. I was in a state where I could not express my emotions. I had to pretend that everything was okay. My parents used to compliment me when I acted like a grown-up at a hospital when I had to get an injection. Even when other kids were crying, I used to stay very calm. You may think that a child being mature is a good thing, but the thing is that a child should be childlike. Even though the kids who act like me may look okay on the outside, they may be suffering on the inside, suppressing their emotions. I will go back to the scene of the past and think from the viewpoint of my subconsciousness and OCD. Getting hurt as bad as to bleed is a situation a kid can get the unconditional attention of his/her parents as well as the easy assurance that he/she is important. When you are hurt you don't have to try and achieve something to get your parents' attention and feel important. A hurt kid can easily get his/her parents' attention accompanied by strong senses of fear and concern. The incident of hurting my head bear a symbolic similarity to the situation of getting my eyes cut by a paper. I started to understand that my OCD symptoms were caused by symbolic stimuli composed of my fear on the things that should never happen as well as the reward hidden behind such fear. After finding this out I became conscious of one thing. Even though I get sick, hurt or even fall down bleeding, it is not going to be the fault of my sisters anymore and I won't be separated with them. Also, I realized that these incidents will no longer provide me with opportunities to confirm the love of my parents. If I lose sight, that will be the end of it. It became very clear that I will be the only one suffering from that loss. As I was in a different situation, I had to change my faiths and thoughts. I didn't have to save anyone or meet the expectations of anyone anymore. I needed someone's protection back then because I was very young. Getting the protection was the most important thing in the past, but it wasn't so anymore, because I was fully grown. I realized that I didn't have to waste my energy on thinking that it was still important. After clearly realizing what was happening inside my mind, I came to realize that I didn't have to be obsessive anymore. It was like turning on a switch. My obsession on going blind was caused by the things that were completely different. I could emotionally understand that I suffered from the things inside my mind. Looking back, I felt sad for myself who had been trapped in such a psychological structure. I also realized that as a child, I was angry for not being able to break out of it. Let's go into deeper psychological analysis. When I was studying for the university entrance exam for the second time, the only outlet for my desire to save my mother was studying. There was nothing I could do but to study. However, I was not convinced that I would do well in my exam. Due to that uncertainty and the possibility of failure, I started to feel fear and anxiety. My obsession was the countermeasure created by my subconsciousness as a preparation for such possibility. That was my weakest lid. My obsessive thoughts were the scary imaginations that I created to punish myself. It was because I wouldn't have to study anymore if I go blind. I would also be able to see how much my parents loved me without having to do anything. However, at the same time, going blind was the thing that should never happen to me. Anxiety is related to the fear of terrible things happening. Obsessive thoughts are the imaginary fear created to deal with uncertainties. I went through this process of recovery when I didn't know much about OCD. However, I stopped imagining my eyes getting paper cut. It was possible because I gained momentary emotional strength. At the beginning, I could still see the glimpse of obsessive thoughts hanging over my head. However, eventually, I became completely free from them. Looking back, I think I was able to relieve my symptoms relatively easily because they were not that severe. I could stop the flames before they spread any further. However, the funny thing was that I still had the urge. What I broke was the link between my anxiety and obsessive thoughts. It looked like my subconsciousness recognized that I didn't need my obsessive thoughts anymore, but the deficiency and the desire caused by it were still left inside my mind. Even though I stopped thinking about a paper, the urge to draw on it was still there. It was pulsing like a beating heart. I didn't know what to do to release that urge. Even after realizing that I didn't have to repeat the obsessive thoughts as they were not real, my desire to be a savior and to be loved was still there. The suppression and deficiency created due to such desire were still there, too. I had to work on them as well. So, I tried to conduct an experiment. I wanted to use this urge productively. I decided to think about something similar to paper. Instead of a sheet of paper, I started to think about a spark and a turned-on light bulb. Every time I thought about the spark in the light bulb, I was to be aware of doing so and imagine myself gathering new energy to act. I put my effort on doing so. My subconsciousness seemed to like that experience. After a few attempts, it became possible for me to replace the image of paper with a spark and a light bulb quite easily. With these new images in my head, I could finish a day in a good mood. However, this does not mean that my subconsciousness accepted these new images. Imprinting new symbols on a subconscious level was not an easy thing to do. I came to understand that a structure with context has to be created. Eventually, the new images I created faded away and my obsessive thoughts did come back once in a while. It took me a long time to solve this problem. It was only after I gained a comprehensive understanding on OCD. So, I tried to divide the feelings of anxiety that was still inside my mind. Relieving the remaining emotions, especially the ones related to anger, was very helpful to me. I also tried to subdivide those anger-related emotions into smaller pieces and tried to accept them one by one. Appropriate thoughts and emotions are the things which make us do appropriate things. Also, by gradually breaking down the psychological structure that had been feeding my anxiety, I could save myself from the pain of my symptoms. Even though it was a mild form of OCD, I had it for more than 15 years. It was encouraging that I got rid of it with relative ease. Instead of living in fear, I took control over my OCD. By doing so, I could re-establish my subjecthood and gain confidence. Of course, I also realized that the tactics I used were not everything about OCD treatment, because my symptoms came back to me in certain situations. However, I rarely suffered from them. The key was in the fact that I knew how to control my OCD. One more thing I gained after witnessing various success cases of OCD treatment is the confidence that I will be able to provide the most valuable solution to people suffering from OCD. If I did it, you can do it too. There always will be a solution for you. You will be able to find the solution if you adhere to the principles I explained. I hope you would never give up.